my friends. Hope you're doing okay. Happy Friday to you. It is time for the Aurora Bedtime Story Project. Just getting my mic off. At 9:30, we do a little bedtime story reading here from the Canopy Room in Somerville, Massachusetts, and that was 2 months and change. Every night, 9:30 here. I haven't had to pay or anything. They've just been very gracious in letting me use the space. But they've got some other things coming on, so we're going to be changing things up a little bit. So this is kind of a farewell stream tonight to the Canopy Room. I'm going to be taking next week off anyway, and yeah, so sort of bittersweet, to be honest. This is, I mentioned yesterday, this has been something I've been wanting to do for a while, and it's been just such an absolute joy to have an opportunity to have a place to do this kind of a thing, and to have some people joining every night. That's been really, really, really nice. And so thank you for being a part of it, and I hope it's helped a little bit during these times. I'm going to strike that phrase from the lexicon immediately, these times. Got a potpourri lined up. Nothing particular, nothing specific. We're just going to do some poems and some excerpts and a little bit of a return to early days of Aurora when we were doing children's books and some requests in particular. So I thought we would start with some Emily Dickinson. I got a couple of requests for Emily Dickinson, and it's nice to have some local poetry on the broadcast. Before we do that, though, it is time for a deep breath. And I don't know if you can hear it where you are, but it is thundering outside and pouring outside. Hopefully we keep power. Yeah. Okay. All the preamble done. Let's do a deep breath. Ready? 1, 2, 3. This great collection of Emily Dickinson's complete poems. And an early poem here caught my eye as I was flipping through this book thinking of what to pick, and I thought it fit nicely with what we've been doing. It's called In a Library. A precious, mouldering pleasure 'tis to meet an antique book in just the dress his century wore. A privilege, I think, his venerable hand to take, and, warming in our own, a passage back or two to make to times when he was young. His quaint opinions to inspect, his knowledge to unfold on what concerns our mutual mind, the literature of old. What interested scholars most? What competitions ran when Plato was a certainty and Sophocles a man? When Sappho was a living girl and Beatrice wore the gown that Dante deified? Facts, centuries before. He traverses familiar, as one should come to town and tell you all your dreams were true. He lived where dreams were sown. His presence is enchantment. You beg him not to go. Old volumes shake their vellum heads to tantalize, just so. I liked the idea of that. Touching an old book and realizing at one point it was new, and that the humanity that connects the two is still there. And those were humans just as much as we are writing that. So an early request for readings here on the Aurora Bedtime Story Project was to do a little Frog and Toad. Sylvia had asked me to do some, and I just hadn't gotten to it. And I figured, since this is the last stream from Canopy Room, I thought, let's do some Frog and Toad. I didn't have a book handy, but I found a PDF online, so I printed it out. I hope you don't mind the sound of papers. But Frog and Toad was a favorite growing up as a kid as well. And they're funny. And this one has to do with gardens, which is perfect with the secret garden that we read yesterday. So, all right. Frog and Toad, the garden. Frog was in his garden. Toad came walking by. "What a fine garden you have, Frog," he said. "Yes," said Toad, "it is very nice, but it was hard work." "I wish I had a garden," said Toad. "Here are some flower seeds. Plant them in the ground," said Frog. "And soon you will have a garden." "How soon?" asked Toad. "Quite soon," said Frog. Toad ran home. He planted the flower seeds. "Now, seeds," said Toad, "start growing." Toad walked up and down a few times. The seeds did not start to grow. Toad put his head close to the ground and said loudly, "Now, seeds, start growing." Toad looked at the ground again. The seeds did not start to grow. Toad put his head very close to the ground and shouted, "Now, seeds, start growing." Frog came running up the path. "What is all this noise?" he asked. "My seeds. They will not grow," said Toad. "You are shouting too much," said Frog. "These poor seeds are afraid to grow." "My seeds are afraid to grow?" said Toad. "Of course," said Frog. "Leave them alone for a few days. Let the sun shine on them. Let the rain fall on them. Soon your seeds will start to grow." That night Toad looked out his window. "Drat," said Toad, "my seeds have not started to grow. They must be afraid of the dark." So Toad went out to his garden with some candles. "I will read the seeds a story," he said. "Then they will not be afraid." Toad read a long story to his seeds. And all the next day, Toad sang songs to his seeds. And all the next day, Toad read poems to his seeds. And all the next day, Toad played music for his seeds. Toad looked at the ground. The seeds still did not start to grow. "What shall I do?" cried Toad. "These must be the most frightened seeds in the whole world." Then Toad felt very tired, and he fell asleep. "Toad, Toad, wake up," said Frog. "Look at your garden." Toad looked at his garden. Little green plants were coming up out of the ground. "At last," shouted Toad, "my seeds have stopped being afraid to grow." "And now you will have a nice garden too," said Frog. "Yes," said Toad, "but you were right, Frog. It was very hard work." The end. I hope you liked that, Sylvia. It was fun to read through some old Frog and Toads while I was coming up with what to do this evening in this potpourri. A lot of great suggestions. Some of them great books and so forth. They're just a little long for a one-off in the evening. So, but thank you for reaching out and answering my query as to what we might do. I had some asks for some poetry by Mary Oliver. So we're going to do next a couple of poems by Mary Oliver. This is from a collection of poems called Good Poems. It's by Garrison Keillor. He did these a number of years ago. He has a series. One is Good American Poems. The first one was simply Good Poems, and this one is called Good Poems for Hard Times. And I thought that was apropos. So I'm going to do a couple of Mary Oliver's poems here. This one, perfect for May the 15th. May the 15th. It's called Spring. Somewhere, a black bear has just risen from sleep and is starting down the mountain. All night, in the brisk and shallow restlessness of early spring, I think of her, her 4 black fists flicking the gravel, her tongue like a red fire touching the grass, the cold water. There is only one question: how to love this world. I think of her rising like a black and leafy ledge to sharpen her claws against the silence of the trees. Whatever else my life is, with its poems and its music and its glass cities, it is also this dazzling darkness coming down the mountain, breathing and tasting. All day I think of her white teeth, her wordlessness, her perfect love. The second poem is called When Death Comes. Again, it's Mary Oliver. When death comes like the hungry bear in autumn, when death comes and takes all the bright coins from his purse to buy me and snaps the purse shut, when death comes like the measle pox, when death come like an iceberg between the shoulder blades, I want to step through the door full of curiosity, wondering, what is it going to be like, that cottage of darkness? And therefore I look upon everything as a brotherhood and a sisterhood, and I look upon time as no more than an idea, and I consider eternity as another possibility. And I think of each life as a flower, as common as a field daisy and as singular, and each name a comfortable music in the mouth, tending as all music does toward silence, and each body a lion of courage, and something precious to the earth. When it is over, I want to say, all my life I was a bride married to amazement. I was the bridegroom, taking the world into my arms. When it's all over, I don't want to wonder if I have made of my life something particular and real. I don't want to find myself sighing and frightened or full of arguments. I don't want to end up simply having visited this world. Yeah, I really love that. It's a great collection of poems. It really is. All 3 books are. Yeah. I was thinking I might try to improvise, find another one in here, but we'll see. Maybe in a bit. So the lion's share of the read tonight I wanted to do is a favorite passage of mine. It's from The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. And if you haven't heard me go on and on about how much I love John Steinbeck, well, I can go on and on about how much I love John Steinbeck. And The Grapes of Wrath in particular is so beautiful. The way it's written, I mean, it tells the story of a family that's moving west, right, during the Great Depression, in particular the Dust Bowl, and moving from a farming culture to try to be a migrant worker in California. And what's beautiful about the book is that Steinbeck intersperses the chapters that tell the story with these vignettes about what's going on generally in the country, or at least to his imagining in the country. And they're like poems, really. I mean, they're so beautifully written. So I wanted to do a favorite chapter of mine, which is chapter 17. And I hope you'll indulge that. It being the last night here, I also allowed myself a little drink. Okay. Chapter 17 of The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. The cars of the migrant people crawled out of the side roads onto the great cross-country highway, and they took the migrant way to the west. In the daylight, they scuttled like bugs to the westward, and as the dark caught them, they clustered like bugs near to shelter and to water. And because they were lonely and perplexed, because they had all come from a place of sadness and worry and defeat, and because they were all going to a new mysterious place, they huddled together, they talked together, they shared their lives, their food, and the things they hoped for in the new country. Thus, it might be that one family camped near a spring, and another camped for the spring and for company, and a third because two families had pioneered the place and found it good. And when the sun went down, perhaps 20 families and 20 cars were there. In the evening, a strange thing happened. The 20 families became one family. The children were the children of all. The loss of home became one loss, and the golden time in the West was one dream. And it might be that a sick child threw despair into the hearts of 20 families, of 100 people. That a birth there in a tent kept 100 people quiet and awe-struck through the night, and filled 100 people with the birth joy in the morning. A family which the night before had been lost and fearful might search its goods and find a present for a new baby. In the evening, sitting about the fires, the 20 were one. They grew to be units of the camps, units of the evening and of the nights. A guitar unwrapped from a blanket and tuned, and the songs, which were all of the people, were sung in the nights. Men sang the words, women hummed the tunes. Every night a world created, complete with furniture, friends made, and enemies established. A world complete with braggarts and with cowards, with quiet men, with humble men, with kindly men. Every night relationships that make a world established. And every morning the world torn down like a circus. At first the families were timid in the building and tumbling worlds, but gradually the technique of building worlds became their technique. Then leaders emerged, then laws were made, then codes came into being. And as the worlds moved westward, they were more complete and better furnished, for their builders were more experienced in building them. The families learned that rights must be to use help or to accept, to offer help or to decline it. The right of a son to court a daughter, and a daughter to be courted by the son. The right of the hungry to be fed, the rights of the pregnant and the sick to transcend all other rights. And the families learned, though no one told them, what rights are monstrous and must be destroyed. the right to intrude upon privacy, the right to be noisy while the camp slept, the right of seduction or abuse, the right of adultery and theft and murder. These rights were crushed because the little worlds could not exist for even a night with such rights alive. And as the worlds moved westwards, rules became laws, although no one told the families. It is unlawful to foul near the camp. It is unlawful in any way to foul the drinking water. It is unlawful to eat good, rich food near one who is hungry unless he is asked to share. And with the laws, the punishments, and there were only two: a quick and murderous fight, or ostracism, and ostracism was the worst. For if one broke the laws, his name and face went with him, and he had no place in any world, no matter where created. In the world, social conduct became fixed and rigid, so that a man must say good morning when asked for it, so that a man might court a willing girl if he stayed with her, if he fathered her children and protected them, but a man might not have one girl one night and another the next, for this would endanger the worlds. The families moved westward, and the technique of building the worlds improved, so that the people could be safe in their worlds. And the form was so fixed that a family acting in the rules knew it was safe in the rules. There grew up government in the worlds, with leaders, with elders. The man who was wise found that his wisdom was needed in every camp. The man who was a fool could not change his folly with this world. And a kind of insurance developed in these nights. A man with food fed a hungry man, and thus insured himself against hunger. And when a baby died, a pile of silver coins grew at the door flap, for a baby must be well buried, since it has had nothing else of life. An old man may be left in a potter's field, but not a baby. A certain physical pattern is needed for the building of a world. Water, a riverbank, a stream, a spring, or even a faucet unguarded. And there is needed enough flat land to pitch the tents, a little brush or wood to build the fires. If there is a garbage dump not too far off, all the better, for there can be found equipment, stovetops, a curved fender to shelter the fire, and cans to cook in and eat from. And the worlds were built in the evening. The people moving in from the highways made them with their tents and their hearts and their brains. In the morning, the tents came down. The canvas was folded, the tent poles tied along the running board, the beds put in place on the cars, the pots in their places. And as the families moved westward, the technique of building up a home in the evening and tearing it down with the morning light became fixed, so that the folded tent was packed in one place, the cooking pots counted in their box. And as the cars moved westward, each member of the family knew and grew into his proper place, grew into his duties, so that each member, old and young, had his place in the car, so that in the weary hot evenings, when the cars pulled into the camping places, each member had his duty and went to it without instruction. Children to gather wood, to carry fire, men to pitch the tents and bring down the beds, women to cook the supper and to watch while the family fed. And this was done without command. The families, which had been units of which the boundaries were a house at night, a farm by day, changed their boundaries. In the long, hot light, they were silent in the cars moving slowly westward. But at night, they integrated with any group they found. Thus they changed their social life, changed as in the whole universe only man can change. They were not farm men anymore, but migrant men. And the thought, the planning, the long staring silence that had gone to the fields went now to the roads, to the distance, to the west. That man whose mind had been bound with acres lived with narrow concrete miles, and his thought and his worry were not any more with rainfall, with wind and dust, with the thrust of crops. Eyes watched the tires now, ears listened to the clattering motors, and minds struggled with oil, with gasoline, with the thinning rubber between air and road. When a broken gear was a tragedy, when water in the evening was the yearning, and food over the fire. Then health to go on was the need and strength to go on, and spirit to go on. The wills thrust westward ahead of them, and fears that had once apprehended drought or flood now lingered with anything that might stop the westward crawling. The camps became fixed, each a short day's journey from the last. And on the road the panic overcame some of the families, so they drove night and day, stopped to sleep in the cars, and drove to the west, flying from the road, flying from movement. And these lusted so greatly to be settled that they set their faces into the west and drove toward it, forcing the clashing engines over the roads. But most of the families changed and grew quickly into the new life. And when the sun went down, time to look out for a place to stop. And there's some tents ahead. The car pulled off the road and stopped, and because others were there first, certain courtesies were necessary. And the man, the leader of the family, leaned from the car. "Can we pull up here and sleep?" "Why, sure. Be proud to have you. What state you from?" "Come all the way from Arkansas." "There's Arkansas people down that fourth tent." "That so?" And the great question, "How's the water?" "Well, she don't taste so good, but there's plenty." "Well, thank you." "No thanks to me." But the courtesies had to be. The car lumbered over the ground to the end tent and stopped. Then down from the car the weary people climbed and stretched stiff bodies. Then the new tent sprang up. The children went for water, and the older boys cut brush or wood. The fires started, and supper was put on to boil or to fry. Early comers moved over, and states were exchanged, and friends and sometimes relatives discovered. "Oklahoma, huh? What county?" "Cherokee." "Why, I got folks there." "Know the Allens?" "There's Allens all over Cherokee." "Know the Willises?" "Why, sure." And a new unit was formed. The dusk came, but before the dark was down, the new family was of the camp. A word had been passed with every family. They were known people, good people. I knowed the Allens all my life. Simon Allen, old Simon, had trouble with his first wife. She was part Cherokee, I believe, purty as a black colt. Sure. And young Simon, he married a Rudolph, didn't he? That's what I thought. They went to live in Enid, done well, real well. Only Allen ever done well. Got a garage. When the water was carried and the wood cut, the children walked shyly, cautiously among the tents. And they made elaborate acquaintanceship gestures. A boy stopped near another boy and studied a stone, picked it up, examined it closely, spat on it, and rubbed it clean and inspected it until he forced the other to demand, "What you got there?" And casually, "Nothing, just a rock." "Well, what you looking at it like that for?" "I thought I seen gold in it." "How'd you know?" "Gold ain't gold, it's black in a rock." "Sure, everybody knows that. I bet it's fool's gold and you figured it was gold." "That ain't so, 'cause Pa, he's found lots of gold and he told me how to look." "How'd you like to pick up a big old piece of gold? Woo-hee. Say, I'd get the biggest old son of a bitchin' piece of candy you ever seen." "I ain't let to swear, but I do anyways." "Me too. Let's go to the spring." And the girls found each other and boasted shyly of their popularity and their prospects. The women worked over the fire, hurrying to get food to the stomachs of the family. Pork, if there was money in plenty. Pork and potatoes and onions. Dutch oven biscuits or cornbread and plenty of gravy to go over it. Side meat or chops, and a can of boiled tea, black and bitter. Fried dough in drippings, if money was slim. Dough fried crisp and brown, and the drippings poured over it. Those families which were very rich or very foolish with their money ate canned beans and canned peaches and packaged bread and bakery cake, but they ate secretly, in their tents, for it would not have been good to eat such fine things openly. Even so, children eating their fried dough smelled the warming beans and were unhappy about it. When supper was over, the dishes dipped and wiped, the dark had come, and then the men squatted down to talk. And they talked of the land behind them. "I don't know what it's coming to," they said. "Whole country's spoiled. It'll come back, though, only we won't be there." Maybe they thought maybe we sinned some way we didn't know about. Feller says to me, "Government feller," and he says she's gullied up on you. Government feller. He says if you plowed across the contour, she won't gully. Never did have no chance to try her. And the new super ain't plowing cross contour. Running a furrow 4 miles long and ain't stopping or going round Jesus hisself. And they spoke softly of their homes. There was a little cool house under the windmill. Used to keep milk in there to cream up, and watermelons. Go in there midday when she was hotter than a heifer, and she'd be just as cool as you want. Cut open a melon in there and she'd hurt your mouth, she was so cool. Water dripping down from the tank. They spoke of their tragedies. Had a brother Charlie, hair as yeller as corn, and him a growed man. Played the accordion nice too. Well, he was harrowing one day and he went up to clear his lines. Rattlesnake buzzed on them horses, bolted, and the harrow went over Charlie, and the points dug into his guts and his stomach. God almighty. They spoke of the future. Wonder what it's like out there. Well, the pictures sure do look nice. I seen one where it's hot and fine, and walnut trees and berries. And right behind, close as a mule's ass on his withers, there's a tall up mountain covered with snow. That was pretty to see. Pretty to see. If we can get work, it'll be fine. Won't have no cold in the winter. Kids won't freeze on the way to school. I'm going to take care of my kids don't miss no more school. I can read good, but ain't no pleasure to me like a fella that's used to it. And perhaps a man brought out his guitar to the front of his tent. And he set out a box to play. And everyone in the camp moved slowly in toward him, drawn in toward him. Many men can chord a guitar, but perhaps this man was a picker. There you have something. The deep chords beating, while the melody runs on the strings like little footsteps. Heavy, hard fingers marching on the frets. The man played, and the people moved slowly in on him until the circle was closed and tight. And then he sang 10-cent cotton and 40-cent meat, and the circle sang softly with him. And he sang, "Why do you cut your hair, girls?" and the circle sang. He wailed the song, "I'm leaving old Texas," that eerie song that was sung before the Spaniards came, only the words were Indian then. And now the group was welded to one thing, one unit, so that in the dark the eyes of the people were inward, and their minds. The children drowsed with the music and went into the tents to sleep, and the singing came into their dreams. And after a while the man with the guitar stood up and yawned. "Well, good night, folks," he said. And they murmured, "Night to you." And each wished he could pick a guitar, because it is a gracious thing. Then the people went to their beds, and the camp was quiet, and the owls coasted overhead, and the coyotes gabbled in the distance. And into the camp skunks walked, looking for bits of food, waddling, arrogant skunks, afraid of no thing. The night passed, and with the first streak of dawn, the women came out of the tents, built up the fires, and put the coffee to boil. And the men came out and talked softly in the dawn. "Now, when you cross the Colorado River, there's the desert," they say. "Look out for the desert. See you don't get hung up. Take plenty of water, in case you do get hung up." "I'm going to take her at night." "Me too. She'll cut the living Jesus out of you." The families ate quickly, and the dishes were dipped and wiped. The tents came down. There was a rush to go. And when the sun rose, the camping place was vacant, only a little litter left by the people. And the camping place was ready for a new world in a new night. But along the highway, the cars of the migrant people crawled out like bugs, and the narrow concrete miles stretched ahead. I really, really, really love that chapter. I mean, the whole book is great. So is East of Eden. And The Moon is Down, what a great novella. Anyway, I really love this chapter. It sticks with me all the time. And, yeah, I'm really glad I got to share it with you, and I hope you enjoyed it as well. Definitely of its time, but still beautifully written. I've got a few more things here for you. I think 3 more things in total. One is a poem. Actually, all 3 of them are poems. This poem is by Claude McKay. He was one of the Harlem Renaissance poets, one of the early poets in the 1910s through 1915, 1916. And, well, there's a lot to be said for this poem. I think you'll see. And what it's talking about is still extremely relevant, unfortunately. There it is. It's called If We Must Die by Claude McKay. If we must die, Let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot, while round us bark the mad and hungry dogs, making their mock at our cursed lot. If we must die, oh, let us die nobly, so that our precious blood may not be shed in vain. Then even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. O kinsmen, we must meet the common foe. Though far outnumbered, let us show us brave, and for their 1,000 blows deal one death blow. What though before us lies the open grave? Like men we'll face the murderous, cowardly pack, pressed to the wall, dying, but fighting back. This poem here was a poem that Leah Pringle, who runs the Canopy Room, asked me to read when I put out requests for. Well, I put out a request for requests. I specifically wanted to make sure that I read something that was special to her, and this is a poem that she read at an open mic night here at Canopy, I think last year, and so sort of paying tribute to that. The mountainsides blazed for weeks, ashes falling on our heads as we stood in the hazy air. And then our son came home with his blackened gear and slept for days. He had fought fire with fire to do the impossible. Now we see it. The giant black slash with stumps in grotesque postures, acres and acres where nothing moves or sings, where nothing waits. But sometimes hope is a black ghost in a fantastic twist, an old dream that flickers in the wind. Not the worrying twining of selfish prayers, but a reach for something extravagant, something holy, like fire itself, which in its madness devours the forest for the sky, and then dreams a new greening, shoots everywhere breaking through the crust of ash. I like that. I like them all. Sort of a phoenix thing going on there, right? Burn it down and something grows out. Grows out from the ash. Well, this is very bittersweet. I have to say, I'm kind of sad. I hope I'm not bringing you down here on a Friday night, but I've really enjoyed reading here at the Canopy Room, and I'm sure I'll figure out something else. That'll be a little process, but it's been just really, really lovely to be able to do this. And we have come to the last little thing I wanted to read. It's something I read early on, actually, when there were some technical difficulties, and I decided, well, I'll just read a small poem, see if this works. And it's a poem that's been sitting here in the room since we started. It's a poem that my grandmother gave to me. It's hung in her house ever since I can remember going to her house, and there was always a candle that hung right next to it. And I always was talking about how much I loved the poem, and then for my birthday, she sent it to me, and I think that's just exceedingly kind. It's this beautiful handwritten poem here. I don't know if you can see it with the, but it's got beautiful writing on it, drawing. And because the candles are back there and all that, I wanted to read one more thing that has to do with candles and with light. A candle. candle's but a simple thing. It starts with just a bit of string, but dipped and dipped with patient hand, it gathers wax upon the strand until complete and snowy white, it gives at last a lovely light. Life seems so like that bit of string. Each deed we do, a simple thing, yet, day by day, if on life's strand we work with patient heart and hand, it gathers joy, makes dark days bright, and gives at last a lovely light. Well, that's it for tonight. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Chris Voss, and stay tuned to the Aurora Bedtime Story Project Facebook page for future projects and places and all that kind of stuff. The mind is working. Creativity abounds. But it's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm really, really happy that you have joined me for this, and yeah, I don't know what else to say. So I guess I will say, for the last time, from this cozy reading nook to wherever it is that you are watching and listening, have a very good weekend. Have a very good night.